Hi, this is Natalie Hoffman of FlyingFreeNow.com, and you're listening to the Flying Free Podcast, a support resource for women of faith looking for hope and healing from hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. Welcome to episode 63 of the Flying Free Podcast. Today I have with me a repeat guest, Gretchen Baskerville, who, if you have listened to this podcast for a while, she has been with us 3 times prior to this. You can find her, and I know you're going to want to after you hear this episode, you can find her on episodes 33, 35, and 56. Gretchen is the author of The Lifesaving Divorce, and it's a newly released book. I've talked about it on my blog, and she's actually we've talked about it in the past episodes, but that was prior to it being released. Now it's actually released, and I want to talk with Gretchen more about why she wrote the book and even address some of the issues that women are most concerned about when they're thinking about getting a divorce. So Gretchen, welcome to the podcast again.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Natalie.
Okay, so Gretchen, I am curious, and I think the listeners might be as well. Why in the world did you want to write a book about divorce?
Yeah, what's a nice Christian girl like me doing, becoming a divorce advocate?
Exactly. You're like a marriage breaker upper. Come on.
Exactly. And just to assure everyone, I mean, my Christian bona fides are amazing. You know, I was brought up in a devout Christian home. My parents have been happily married for 60 years and going strong to this day. You know, I was raised, devoutly evangelical. I read all the Elizabeth Elliot Passion and Purity, books. I'm a boomer. So actually, I got married before I Kissed Dating Goodbye ever came out. But we had our own version of purity culture long before that book came out, because we had Passion and Purity, which taught us to be very passive, that we couldn't take any kind of initiative, that we had to do a lot of mind reading with the person we were dating, and so forth. And then also books like Fascinating Girlhood. So same kind of principles. Our rules were a little bit different as boomers. We could kiss and make out, but our hands could not go wherever a bathing suit covered. So those were our rules. But the other rules about, if you do everything right, you're going to have this deep, close connection with your spouse, and you'll have mind-blowing sex.
Yeah.
And the formulas were there. We still had the formulas that promised us these amazing marriages as long as we did every single step. And that included, the guy would ask the girl's father for permission to date her, and then eventually to prove that he was financially stable, and then ask for her hand in marriage. So all variations of these purity culture rules existed way back in, baby boomer, and even, of course, in prior generations as well. Mm-hmm. So when you ask, why did I write this book? Well, 25 years ago, I went through a life-saving divorce. I was in a situation where I just could not stay, and I was terrified for my children, and I was worried about, all these messages, that you're a quitter, I knew I wasn't a quitter because I knew what was going on behind closed doors. I knew what all the secrets were. But I was worried that other people would condemn me and look down on me, and so on and so forth. And so I did choose to get a life-saving divorce. I was very worried for my kids, but fast forward to the good news. My children are now adults. They completed their educations. They are great human beings. They are wonderful employees, wonderful friends. Everybody likes them, and they're a great asset to our society. So,
So you didn't end up in a trailer park eating cat food then?
No. Even though I had, at the time of I didn't see my divorce coming. I actually, there was a moment in time where I caught my husband doing something horrible. And my mind went completely numb. I hadn't stored up money for this. I hadn't prepared for this in any way. I knew he was, yeah, I knew he had serious, serious problems in his life. And we had, fasted and prayed and gone to church marriage retreats and seen, umpty zillion counselors. But, it, and I had even resigned myself to the fact that, happiness in marriage is really overrated and, I'll just keep plugging through. But, I didn't have any money stored away. I was only working I had a little home based business and I was making $500 a month. And I mean, that wouldn't even cover, my housing. So, I looked at the future and I was just terrified. And my father said to me, trust God, obey, just pay one bill at a time. Don't project all your fears out into the future, because when we project all of our fears out into the future, we aren't projecting God's grace and God's power out into the future. And God's grace and power and his love. Remember we all know those verses, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. This is the time to remember those great verses. And that's what happened. I don't even know how I made it through the first year. That was a miracle to me. But, through borrowing from my parents, and, getting rid of my acrylic nails and really cutting down on everything, we made it through. And I had been in the workforce before. I'd been a pretty good salesperson. I knew that I could make good money in sales. And so I weighed off, should I stay with my little home-based business or should I go back into the sales force? And in my case, I felt like the Lord was calling me to stay in and work in my own home-based business, which ended up taking off and doing well and eventually giving me a living wage. 2 years after my divorce, women's ministries at my church, they knew that I was a devout Christian. I had a Bible degree from Wheaton College. And they said, we've got a lot of single moms and divorcees in this church. Would you start a support group for them? So I and another woman started a support group. And wow, was it fabulous. I mean, the level of sharing and intimacy and camaraderie was better than any Bible study I'd ever been in. And we really cared about one another and called each other and really supported each other. And over time, as I listened to their stories, I heard amazing stories of total horror, domestic violence, women who, having knives thrown at them, women being dragged by their heels and thrown against walls and things like that. And I thought, I don't think our churches really understand what's going on here. And I started really exploring scripture and realizing, God does not want us treated this way. And we're being treated, even we innocent spouses were being treated by like second-class citizens in our churches. We were being removed from leadership positions and things like that, even on the worship team. Even though we were the faithful spouses, we were the ones who kept trying over again. And we were the ones who kept walking in the door when we knew good and well that our spouse was going to do something horrible or abuse us again. And so after a while, women would come to my group and say, you're saying things we've never heard from anyone else. You really need to write a book. And I thought, yeah, I'll write a book someday. And so I would write chapters of the book. So a lot of the research in this book, I started maybe 10, 20 years ago. I wanted to know, how did I ever get into a horrible marriage like this? And what can I say to my children to keep them from getting into horrible marriages? And what can I do to educate other evangelical churches and our youth pastors so that they don't create an environment where young people get into horrible marriages? So I started researching that really early. In fact, my chapter 2 of my book is really research that goes back literally probably 10 or 15 years, as I looked back on what are we doing wrong that so many good Christian women are getting into these horrible, horrible relationships. So I was single for 20 years. I was a single mother for 20 years after my divorce, and people can listen to my story in episode 33. And God just blessed me abundantly. Now, I'm not going to lie; those first few years were just really tough, and I did have a lot of court abuse in my story. I was dragged into court every year for 10 years. over custody, and yet God was with us, and we survived, and we ended up thriving. And I'm just really, I just, I love to tell the story of God's faithfulness through all of this. So, after 20 years of being single, I finally remarried, and I have a wonderful husband who loves the snot out of me. he
That
loves
is awesome.
he loves feisty women. He loves outspoken women.
Oh,
It
great.
doesn't. He's not at all intimidated by the fact that I did well in my career, and he just thinks it's awesome. You go, girl. And he's the one who said, you have so much to say on this topic. You've got to write a book. So I'm sorry, that's sort of a long explanation for why I wrote it. But I finally, sat down and started writing. And then I got a good kick in the pants from you and a few other people online. And then I was part of an executive roundtable, a completely secular group here in Los Angeles. And the men and women in that group said, you know what? You've got a lot to say. You've got to write a book.
Yep.
So that's how it started.
That is incredible. And you know what I think is interesting too, is that it was within the context of actually being married to a healthy man that you were able to put this thing out in the world that has the potential to change. Well, it is changing lives. I just think that, when the church tries to keep people in dysfunctional marriages, they don't even realize that they're actually playing into Satan's game and neutralizing people from actually doing the work of Jesus Christ in the world. It's phenomenal.
Absolutely.
And I didn't write my book either until I was remarried and had the same thing, had a husband who just loves everything about me, loves that I'm a leader, loves that, and encourages me to be everything that I can be. So I think that's awesome. Okay, so one of the things that I want to talk about, especially today, is how your book addresses 3 different issues. Because the women that I work with, when they are thinking about, a lot, the women come to me and they're trying to figure out, my marriage is so confusing and painful. Is it really as bad as all that? Is there any way that I can stay, or should I stay, or should I leave, or what should I do? And they're presenting to me with all the signs and symptoms of having been abused, okay, over a long period of time. But they are concerned about 3 things. They don't know for sure if divorce is going to be life-saving. They think that, they know that their life right now is definitely not life-giving, but in their minds, they're thinking, if I get a divorce, though, it's going to destroy my relationship with God. They're concerned about that's going to destroy my kids, and it's going to destroy me financially. So it doesn't sound like a life-saving divorce to me. What would you say how would you address those 3 things in a woman, those 3 concerns that a woman would have?
Well, in a 30-minute podcast, I probably can't, but let me give you a few places to start. I've got an entire chapter 6 in my book, The Life-Saving Divorce, is all on God's protection of women and all the Bible verses about allowing divorce for abuse, for infidelity, for neglect, for failure to provide. And so, but let me start with the big taboo that our churches always point to, and they always point to Malachi 2:15 and 16, where they claim, I've heard this all of my life, they claim that what that Bible verse says is, I hate divorce, or God hates divorce. But in reality, that's a bad translation. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's a bad interpretation. I am actually saying they've got the Hebrew wrong. It's a bad translation. If you pull out, you can go online right now, stop the podcast for just a moment, and go online to a Hebrew interlinear Bible. And remember, it reads left to right. They have them online. And you will see that it doesn't say, I hate divorce. And it doesn't say God hates divorce. Several Bible translations do have it right. The New International Version has it right. And even the English Standard Version, the ESV, has it right.
Which has so many other things wrong, but they do have that one right.
They've got that one right. Thank goodness. So let me read it to you so let's take that one. Let's take the ESV. It says, For the man who does not love his wife, but divorces her, says the Lord, the God of Israel, covers his garment with violence. So guard yourselves in your spirit and do not be faithless. God is not against all divorce. God is against treacherous divorce.
Yeah.
The divorce where an abusive man who just takes advantage and just exploits his wife. And of course, there are men in this situation too. So I don't mean to make this all that men are all the bad guys and women are all the good guys. And abandons the faithful, innocent spouse. Those are the divorces God hates. But God is a divorcee himself. If you look at Jeremiah 3:8, he divorced Israel because marriage is not an unconditional contract. Marriage, the Bible talks about both conditional and unconditional contracts. God made some conditional contracts with Israel, but he made God made some unconditional contracts with Israel, but he made two conditional contracts with them. And marriage is a good example of a conditional contract. And God told them, you've committed spiritual adultery. I'm divorcing you. So even God is a divorcee. So I want to just make it really clear. And if you want more, I've got a whole chapter on this. And I think it also bears mentioning that just in the last couple of months, a man who signed and authored the Danvers Statement, the complementarian statement, actually came out in favor of divorce for abuse himself. So the tide is turning on this, and if you're staying in that marriage because you believe that God doesn't allow for divorce, read my chapter on this. God does allow divorce for abuse.
Yes, it's a great chapter. And I'll point out too that she had Dr. David Instone Brewer, prior to this, his book is the one that I would always recommend to people. It's called, and I still recommend it. It's called Divorce and Remarriage in the Church. And he is a scholar out of Britain,
Cambridge,
right?
Yeah, Cambridge, right?
And incredibly intelligent man, and done his homework plus. And he actually came in and edited that chapter.
He edited that chapter for me. He went over it twice. Now, if there are any errors, they're mine, not his. But absolutely, and he went over the chapter with a fine-tooth comb. So. Even though I do have a Bible degree, I didn't feel like I was qualified to write on this. And so I was really thrilled to have him come in and work on it. And he gave me the book a great endorsement afterwards.
Yeah. Yes. This is such a good book. We were talking about it earlier, how she couldn't find a traditional publisher to publish it because, of course, the content is so it's so non-traditional as far as, Christian publishers, what they're looking for. But it's too bad, because I think that this is where we're headed. This is truth. And I think we're starting to, the church, with a capital C, Church of Jesus Christ, is starting to recognize the grave errors that they've made in this area that has exploited women and children in the name of God. And we're starting to turn that. So just like in the past, in history, in all of history, there's been points of where God has revealed more and more of who he is and more of his heart. And then the church shifts and the gospel goes out in even greater power because of that. And I really think that this is one area, stronghold of Satan. And I think that the shift is starting to take place. I'm super excited about it. And you women who are listening, or even pastors or other, counselors, you guys are on the cutting edge of this whole thing. You are the pioneers. You are the people, those of you who are divorced and you've gone through so much pain and you've had no support, you are the pioneers. The pioneers, they went out there and they did all the messy work before the rest of the people followed. And that's what we've been doing here. And I think you can be proud of yourselves, and you can just feel like you are being used by God in really powerful ways in history. So I went on a little rant there, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. The church has to adjust to society. And one of the most powerful things, I don't know if you saw that article in Christianity Today, February 4th, 2020. It came out, and the graph at the very bottom of the article showed how badly evangelicals are doing with divorcees. Our divorcees, we have demonized divorcees so badly
yeah.
that they don't want to come to evangelical churches. Now they do show up in droves, but a huge number, 20% of them don't, just because of the negative, you know, the negative messaging they get from the pulpit or from Christian authors and Christian radio broadcasts. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. If the evangelical church wants to grow, the last thing they should be doing right now is demonizing divorcees and saying the divorce is evidence of moral decay in society, when in reality, tolerating or ignoring abused wives is evidence of moral decay in our churches.
Amen. Amen. That is a great quote. I love that. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about the financial aspect and then the kids aspect too?
Yeah, I was hoping I could get my hands on a study I just ran across recently, but what they're discovering is that now women after divorce aren't doing as badly as they used to, and it's because of what they call human capital, which means a lot of us had some level of job experience before we married or even early in our marriages. And so we now have skills and knowledge and experience that women, 50 and 100 years ago didn't have. And so we're a lot better able to get back on our feet. Now, again, I want to be really clear. It took me probably 3 years to feel like there was going to be a light at the end of the tunnel for me financially.
Mm-hmm.
And within 7 years, I was contributing to my retirement fund and doing great. So,
and can I jump in here really quick?
Yeah, go for it.
I just want to say that for a lot of women, they were being financially abused, or their husbands were, in the same way that their husband's character was showing up very negatively in the relationship, it was showing up really negatively in relationship with money. And they weren't necessarily in a good place. I know a lot of women who financially were in a very bad place. They didn't have any financial autonomy whatsoever in their relationship. And these are smart women. They get out of that relationship where they do have financial autonomy, and they really make a go of it, like you did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've got any kind of drive or a go-getter, you can do this. And frankly, the workplace is looking for anybody who's honest and hardworking. Mm-hmm. If you're honest and hardworking and you bring your integrity to the workplace, you're really valuable. And so I wouldn't, I think that women have a lot more going for them than they think, but they've been talked down to so much by their abuser that they've lost their confidence and their self-respect, and they don't think that they can make it. But in many cases, you can.
Yep. I love that. So what about kids? This is like the heart of every woman out there. This is their most tender spot. They're worried about their kids.
Absolutely. And boy, there's nothing a good parent worries about more than their children. And the good news is that a lot has changed in divorce and the outcomes of children in the last 25 years. And so let me give you a few stats, but my chapter 7 is all about kids and divorce. And there's a lot of good news. So, when I divorced 25 years ago, we didn't even have access to these studies. But now they're saying that 8 in 10 kids whose parents divorce have no social, emotional, or psychological serious emotional, social, and psychological problems long term. Okay, so of course they're going to feel the stress in the middle of this big, divorce battle, and in the middle of the divorce process, of course, they're going to, struggle. You may have to move, make new friends, go to a different school. Of course, that's going to be tough on them. But what researchers have also discovered is that if you are in a high conflict or very high conflict home, where there's abuse or put downs or just even invisible abuse going on, covert abuse that's causing tension and walking on eggshells and agitation. The kids sense that. I know my 3-year-old sensed that 25 years ago when I divorced. Absolutely sensed it. Even though he never saw us fighting. We never did anything on the surface. But wow, we're in denial if we think the kids aren't catching on to that. And what researchers discovered was that if you are in one of these high conflict or high distress or very high distress marriages, it was 10 times better for you and 10 times better for the children if you got out of a very high conflict home than if you had stayed. We don't have a choice. You'll see it on all sorts of conservative think tanks and websites. Oh, well, being raised in a functional, happy 2-parent home is better for kids. Of course it's better for kids, but we don't have that option.
Right.
We don't have that option. So the real question for us was, is it better to stay in this abusive, high tension, high stress, agitated home, or is it better for our kids to leave? And what researchers have known for 20 years is it's better to go. And my book goes, this book has over 200 footnotes. If you don't believe me, I've got every single study down to who wrote it, what year, the name of the study, who published it, and the page number. You can look at it yourself.
Yeah, this is a well-researched book. I was so impressed.
And in fact, I've got, for those of you who aren't convinced, if you want a little bit of a taste of it, go to my website and sign up for my free email list. And you can download something called 7 Effective Ways to Deal with Criticism When You Divorce. And it has some of these children's studies in it. And where you'd go is lifesavingdivorce.com/courage. So lifesavingdivorce.com/courage. Sign up for my email list and you'll get an automatic email coming back to you with a link to 7 effective ways to deal with criticism when you divorce. So another thing you should know about kids that has changed in 25 years is, remember they used to say, if you get divorced, you're dooming your children's marriages because they're going to be more likely to get divorced.
Yes.
We heard that over and over and over again. And 25 years ago, guess what? That was true. But it's not true anymore. Now, okay, I'll give you the exact stats. The man who did the original research 25 years ago is still alive and well and still researching this topic. And he just updated his stats last year. And he said, as of now, most adults whose parents divorced do not divorce. In fact, the majority of people whose parents divorce have lifelong marriages. So let me give you the exact stats for those of you who like numbers. 45% of adults whose parents divorced got divorced themselves in this study. And 41% of adults whose parents did not divorce got divorced. So do the math here. We're talking about only 4% difference. And 4%, so 4 in 100, we're talking like that's negligible in my mind. That's not a good reason to stay.
And you know what? When I think about my older kids who watched the whole thing and, and understood exactly what was going on, they all have, if you talked with any of them, they all have they have more understanding, relationship understanding, like emotional intelligence than I ever had when I was their age. And they are more, I think that they're more apt to see recognize a pathological relationship and avoid getting into one. I know they all, you know, I mean, one of them for sure is like, there, I will not, I'm waiting a long, I don't even know if I'm going to get married, but if I do, it's going to be a long, I'm going to make sure I know this person inside and out. Whereas back in our day, we were just like, we felt pressure even by Christians to just get married, like just get married, you're 20, get married.
Right. It was
And
one of the messages. Yeah.
yeah. And that's so stupid when you think about it. Like date someone. So many of the women that I work with, they got married they met their man at church, got married when they were in their early 20s, and without even really understanding or knowing who they were as well as who their partner was.
Yep. No life experience. And then we were given the message that any two people who were Christians, God would protect their marriage and God would make their marriage happy.
Right.
Or if at least not happy, that it would be a good marriach.
Right. All you needed was to make sure the other person was a Christian. If you could check that box, you're good to go.
Right. And boy, that was really naive.
Yeah.
Let me throw in one more. And like I said, chapter 7 in my book on kids and divorce is just packed full of quotes and data and, really important information. But one of the things we were always threatened with is that our kids would have drug and alcohol problems. So I went to a long longitudinal study, and here's what I found. First of all, your kids are not likely to have alcohol or drug problems if you divorce. The vast majority of kids in America, even in single parent and step parent families, don't have any substance abuse problems. So let me give, again, for those number geeks out there, I'll give you the actual numbers. Only 6 in 100 adolescents in single mother families had substance abuse problems. That means 94 in 100 single mother families had no substance abuse problems.
Wow.
Now, should we look at two-parent families? Here we go. Only 5 in 100 adolescents in two-parent families had substance abuse problems. 95 in 100 two-parent families have no substance abuse problems. So again, this is negligible. Okay, right. So a 1% difference. Is that worth keeping your kids in that home and having them observe you being abused or experiencing abuse yourself? I mean, the ACE study from Kaiser Permanente in 1998 told us if our kids were either experiencing themselves or observing, abuse or sexual, physical abuse, or their parent being abused, or there was substance abuse in the home, that would give them, if they saw enough of these adverse childhood events, that this would affect their adult health. And, why didn't anyone tell us this? They just told us that we had to stay and pray and try harder and forgive over and over and go the extra mile over and over. They completely concealed from us the damage this was doing to our children.
Right. Well, and that's just the thing. Divorce is a symptom of a much more insidious problem. And people, when kids grow up in being traumatized in that way, that is what leads to things like substance abuse and eating disorders and other kinds of pathologies. It's not divorce. Divorce is just a symptom. Divorce is what happens when there is something very dysfunctional going on in that marriage.
Yeah. And I would say my children will tell you, absolutely. They have both individually come to me and said, I'm so glad you divorced Dad.
Yeah.
Because our lives would have been really tense and dysfunctional had we not.
Yeah.
And they have expressed that more than once. I do want to bring up one other topic.
Okay.
On the importance of divorce in society. And I know, again, I feel, it's so strange to be this nice Christian girl promoting divorce, but it is life-saving. It is literally life-saving. So prior to 1969, you had to go before a judge and prove via airtight evidence usually collected by a private investigator or something, that your spouse was cheating on you or had been drunk and missed work a certain number of days and things like that. And the judge, you could actually go and hire an attorney and go to court, and the judge could actually say, "No, I don't think you should get a divorce," and send you right back to your abuser. And then in 1969, starting in California, signed into law, or the then Governor Ronald Reagan signed the first no-fault divorce bill in the state of California. And from that point on, all the other states kind of fell in line over the next 13 or 14 years. And almost all of them passed some kind of no-fault divorce. As you know, there's no federal divorce law in the United States. Every state has its own variation on it. But the researchers said, wow, this is a moment in time where we can see what happens when you allow people to divorce for any reason, for irreconcilable differences, and they don't have to go before a judge and prove how badly they were beaten or how contemptuously they'd been treated. So the researchers all lined up, all the family sociology researchers just watched. And over time, because they knew what date no-fault divorce went into effect in every single one of these states. So it was an amazing event in human history. And over time, what happened was they saw the suicide rate of wives decrease by about 20%.
Wow.
The domestic violence rate domestic violence rate by and against men and women decreased by about 30%. And the homicide rate against women by intimates decreased 5 to 10%. So if your pastor or your church leaders are telling you to stay, they're putting up barriers to a life-saving divorce, they are, in some form, sending you messages that are increasing suicide, domestic violence, and homicide. And we just can't do that. And I want to reach out to any pastors or church leaders who are listening to this. Stop it. We cannot be promoting these messages any longer because we are killing people with these messages.
Mm-hmm. I want to close with one last question. I'm wondering if you have ever talked with a woman who's been divorced, who's maybe 5 years out or more, who looks back and really regrets it. They really wish that they would never have gotten divorced.
Yeah, I have. It's really rare. I would say that in 20 years of doing divorce recovery work, I would say that I only know one. And she was a woman who filed for divorce in an effort to get her husband to proclaim his undying love for her. And she really hoped that what she was doing was threatening him. If you don't behave better, or if you don't show more love for me. He was actually a decent guy. She never ever said that he was abusing her. Okay. So she threatened him with divorce and then went through with it. And when he didn't step up to the plate and fight for her love, she wished that she hadn't done that, because she didn't think she wasn't being abused, and she didn't think that he would have divorced her had she not filed first. So that's the only person, believe it or not, that I've heard. But perhaps you've heard other stories.
No, I haven't. Well, and I think that one is unusual because it wasn't, I guess I was thinking more for my listeners who are in abusive relationships, that I'm just was curious if you had known anyone who had been abused who actually wished that they had stayed, or who looked back and thought, maybe I could have made that work.
Even the most abused women who are poor and living on the kindness of strangers, they are so happy to be out. Yeah. Their lives are, they don't have the wealth they had before. They don't have the fancy house, but they're not being beaten. Their children aren't being molested. I mean, they feel peace and calm, and they would tell you, no regrets.
Yeah. That's been my experience. I've talked to a lot of divorced women and just asked them, is there anything that you wish you would have done differently? Well, there's things that they wish they would have done differently, but none of them. I mean, and yes, same thing. Just not living to the, not financially as stable as they used to be, but definitely happy to be out. And I have a local friend who is, she's been working multiple jobs and living in an apartment, whereas before she lived in a nice house and was a stay-at-home homeschooling mom. And she's just like, no, my life, she's really struggling, but no, my life is way better now than it used to be. I would never go back in a million years. So,
right. Yeah. I would say, yeah, in 20 years of doing this and talking to hundreds of people, absolutely no regrets.
Yeah. Well, life-saving indeed. I'm so glad that you wrote this book. I recommend for all of you who are listening, even if you know someone who is confused, or even if you're not thinking about divorce for yourself, but you want to educate yourself so that you know how to talk to other people who are thinking about divorce or who are divorced. I think this book it's a huge mind shift for people, and it needs to happen in our church. We need to be aligned with what Gretchen shows in this book so that we can actually be life-giving to the people who are being abused or who are being mistreated what's the word I'm looking for? Manipulated, as well as those who are already out. They've gotten divorced and they're looking to find their place in the body of Christ. Absolutely. And they deserve to have their place in the body of Christ. That's what they were created for. So we need to get them back in there and lock them in. And if they're feeling like they're being rejected just because they had a life-saving divorce, that needs to end. It really does.
So. I just have to throw in one last comment. It's available as an ebook for $7.99, but the full book is pretty thick. The book is $18.99. But would you believe it? Half of the orders for this book are multiples. So they're buying more than one. So they're buying one for their pastor, or they're buying one for themselves and a friend, or they're buying one for themselves and someone else in leadership, or someone who's struggling in a marriage. So I've actually probably 1 in 5 orders that's placed is actually large numbers, 5 and more. So I think that some churches, some pastors are really jumping on this and saying, I've got to re-educate my staff.
Yeah. I love it. So go out and if you haven't gotten it, you need to go out and buy it now. It's on Amazon. I'll put a link in the show notes, or you can just go to Amazon and look up Life-Saving Divorce by Gretchen Baskerville. And thank you so much again, Gretchen, for being willing to come back here and share with the Flying Free listeners. And for the rest of you, thanks for listening. Until next time, fly free.